The energy source used by the relics is now simply called Ancient Energy. It's a highly viscous blue liquid that can be found in a few places around Hyrule, and in abundance under Hyrule Castle. Using this energy, the ancient Shiekah were able to create devices like guidance stones that could communicate information, as well as weapons and shrines. Okay, hello and welcome to today's video. So, if you couldn't already tell, in today's video we're talking about Ancient Energy, or more specifically, what it actually is and how it works. Or at least how I think it does anyway. So I've had this theory in the back of my mind for a very long time now, but I just never got around to doing it, so I'm glad to finally be able to do this, especially being that I've not done theory videos on my channel for ages, and the ones which I did, they left a lot to be desired, to be honest. Anyway though, I hope you'll all join me as we dive into the world of ancient blue liquid. Let's go. So, if we're going to determine what exactly Ancient Energy is, we'll first need to set some basic facts straight. The name Ancient Energy is incorrect. By definition, energy is a property of physical objects, but not a physical thing itself. For simplicity, I'll continue to refer to the blue stuff as Ancient Energy, because that's what the book calls it. However, do note it's not actually energy, but rather something else, an unknown substance, and that's what we're going to try and determine. The next thing to know is that Ancient Energy is a substance which can be found in high concentrations as viscous blue liquid, most notably underneath Hyrule Castle, East Necluda and Northern Akala. It's also been confirmed in numerous cases that a large proportion of Shiekah Technology relies on Ancient Energy to function. Now, I asked on my Discord server what everyone thinks Ancient Energy is, and the general consensus was that it's a fuel used to power the Shiekah Technology. However, this is where things start to get tricky. If you look into it, Ancient Energy can be found to possess several other properties too, aside from fuel, which leads to it not just being used as fuel, but also as a form of data storage and magic, all of which are quite different things, you know? So this leads to the obvious question of, what exactly is Ancient Energy, and how does it work? Well, to answer that question, let's start by looking at how Ancient Energy functions as a source of fuel, by delving into the Masterworks book. Let's first look at some old concept art, which shows Ancient Energy literally being injected into a Shiekah slate, to likely power it up, as there's no mention of how a device actually gets power inside the main game, so I presume this is how it was going to receive power. However, they did scrap this, so I am only using this as a backup point right now. I've got a main point in a minute, but I did feel it was worth mentioning. I mean, especially if you consider that they likely scrapped it for gameplay reasons, because think about it would be awkward to have to keep charging the Shiekah slate up, but plot-wise, the Shiekah slate probably still uses Ancient Energy. Moving on to a more solid point now, Masterworks also mentions that the Divine Beasts are activated by feeding them Ancient Energy and using the Shiekah slate. This would imply the use of Ancient Energy as power to boot up the Divine Beasts, and the Shiekah slate as the tool for doing this. This especially makes sense when you consider the control units on the Divine Beasts. They contain a massive giant blue glowing thing on the back of them, and if you look at the name of this blue thing in the files of the game, it's called Ancient Reactor, and a reactor is a tool which converts fuel into power. So I think the implication here is that this big reactor is converting the Ancient Energy, which is the fuel, into power for the Divine Beast. Anyway, now that we've established the idea that Ancient Energy can be used as fuel, let's look at how it's used as a medium for transferring data. In case you forgot, what you just saw there is a cutscene for where a rune is added to a Shiekah slate. The main thing to take note of here is the fact that the rune is transferred to the device in the form of Ancient Energy. So surely this would imply that Ancient Energy is used to store data, right? I mean, they drop the Ancient Energy onto the Shiekah slate, and then it gets the rune. Well, you don't just have to take my word on it. I've actually found a way in which all of this lines up perfectly, and I can prove it. So first, let's take a moment to step aside and look at how data is actually stored on computers. All the data on computers is stored in the form of binary. If you don't know how binary works already, then for the sake of this video, you should know that it's a series of ones and zeros, with 1 meaning true and 0 meaning false. I won't bore you by going any further. Now, let's take another step in a completely different direction. Chemistry. We're going to need to know what distillation is. And saving the details of how it works, distillation is basically removing specific chemicals from a liquid. Right, so with those two definitions in mind, let's look back at the cutscene. One thing which should stick out immediately to you now is the fact that it says distilling rune, which, as we now know, would mean that it's removing some chemicals from the rune. Going back to the whole binary thing, I would say that it's using whether or not certain chemicals are present inside the ancient energy to store data. So, if this chemical is there, that's a 1. If it's not there, that's a 0. If you get what I mean? And that's why it distills it before putting it onto a Shiekah slate. It removes certain chemicals to make a certain rune, and it removes different chemicals to make a different rune. Still unsure about this whole idea of data being transferred onto a Shiekah slate? Well, let's go ahead and look at the object that's actually doing this. The pedestal is known as a guidance stone, and according to Masterworks, they allow stored data to be transferred. And given that ancient energy is literally dropped onto a Shiekah slate, I think it's safe to say that this is that data being transferred. Now, although the ideas I just presented do work in the isolated situation of transferring runes onto the Shiekah slate, that's not it. The idea of chemicals in the liquid being used to store data also fits with several other parts of the game too, and it works really well. So let's take a look at them, shall we? The first one I'll bring up is the colour of Shiekah devices. They all glow orange if they're on standby mode, but blue if they're active, and then purple if they're corrupted by Ganon. The reason this all lines up, once again, comes back to chemicals. If you add certain chemicals to certain liquids, you can make the liquids change colour really fast, just like say how a tower changes from orange to blue. So although we can't assume what chemicals are being used, it's entirely possible that the ancient energy in one form is orange, and when another chemical is added it turns blue. And then going back to what I said about the presence of chemicals representing data inside the ancient energy, this could work perfectly. Add a certain chemical, that represents the idea that it's now on, and it also turns it blue from orange. It works amazingly. And then there is malice. It's seen on the loading screens of the game that if malice comes into contact with water, it sullies the water and turns into the purple goop that you all know and hate. So it's a reasonable assumption that the reason the Shiekah technology goes purple is because the malice goes into the ancient energy, converts it into goop just like the water, and then Ganon has control over the technology. Because both of them are liquids. Ugh, all of that was a mouthful. Hopefully that makes sense to most of you because, well, now it's time to move on to the next scenario in which it works, the blue flames. Another property of chemicals is that when certain ones are burnt in a flame, the flame can actually change colour. Given that the blue flame is created from an ancient furnace, which is attached to an ancient reactor, which we know contains ancient energy from before, I think it's relatively easy to assume that the blue flame is exactly this. Ancient energy being burnt to cause a coloured flame. So in a way, when carrying the blue flame to a tech lab, you're in fact carrying some ancient energy to a lab. Although main point being here that it still matches the whole idea of it being a chemical from before. I do realise that I just went over a lot of potentially complex stuff for some of you, and that I'm also not the best scriptwriter, so if any of it confused you, let me know why in the comments so I can both improve next time, but also try and help explain it to you maybe. Anyway though, that's all the evidence for the use of ancient energy to transfer data. A lot, I know. In fact, it's probably more than all of the evidence used for the fuel and magic put together. Speaking of which, I'm now going to cover the evidence for why ancient energy can also be used as magic. Despite what I said earlier about the thought of ancient energy being fuel being the most common opinion, I've also seen the theory that it's a form of magic quite a bit too. If you look into it, this does indeed make sense, as there are many examples around the world of seemingly magical events related to ancient energy that just make no sense otherwise. The first and most obvious ones, I'd say, are Monk Maz Koshia and Master Koga. Both of them seem to use the stuff in their fights, conjuring up metal balls and such whilst fighting them. Maz Koshia especially, as he literally glows blue with the stuff at times, and even uses it to become giant. The next example is one which I'm guaranteeing you've all seen, but probably overlooked. Runes. At the very least, the bomb rune uses ancient energy, as it gives off the same blue aura. However, given the nature of their use, I think it's likely that other ones use ancient energy too. But the main problem is that they all accomplish feats which are seemingly impossible, even with the best of technology. Literally pausing time, or generating ice out of nothing. So there's a heavy indication here of them using magic too. And then for the next point, we're actually going to go back to something I mentioned earlier. The fact that the Divine Beasts have to actually be charged up before they work. Charging them with ancient energy would surely only power them up for a limited time, especially given that they've been active for over a century now, even firing out massive lasers at Calamity Ganon towards the end of the game, yet they never seem to run out. Masterworks mentions how they're able to generate a tremendous amount of energy to fire at Calamity Ganon. However, noting how it says generate, the use of the word generate makes it seem as though they're actually able to generate their own energy after they've been initially activated and they only needed energy given to them in the first place to turn on. In the case of Meadow, it's literally flying in the air, never able to land, so there's just no way it could get ancient energy into it. Basically, there's a lot of uses for ancient energy that just don't make sense. However, all of that changes if you treat ancient energy as a type of magic, kind of omnipresent and always there, only as a liquid in high amounts. It could just be an innate ability of the Shiekah to draw ancient energy from their surroundings, which would explain why Mazkashia and Koga are both able to cast spells. Even Shiekah in the older games have powers. It'd also explain the runes. Who needs to follow the normal laws of physics if you can just cast a spell to make something happen, with the Shiekah slate taking energy from the surroundings to achieve this goal? And finally, if the ancient energy is an omnipresent force, that'd explain exactly how the Divine Beasts are able to keep charged up. They just absorb it from their surroundings once they've been turned on. However, despite all of this, I must admit that, at least for me, just saying it's possible because it's magic does feel like a kind of cop-out, and I'm not really so keen on that, but at the same time, it does fit so well in this case that I did want to go over it. Well, there we have it. I've gone over all my reasons as to why I think that ancient energy works as a form of fuel, a form of magic, and a source of data transfer. At the end of the day, I don't really think we can say what the ancient energy actually is, to be honest. But despite that, I do think that's kind of cool. It adds a sense of mystery surrounding the whole thing. Regardless though, we have covered how it works really well. I'm very confident in the ideas I presented here, especially the one using chemicals for the data transfer. At the end of the day though, it is only a theory. Only the developers can confirm anything. It's just fun ideas about how stuff might work. I'm not too particularly happy about how there's no evidence behind the magic one, but I still do think it fits. Regardless though, I hope you enjoyed watching. That is it for today's video now. And considering how all YouTubers seem to promote their Patreon or whatever at this point in the video, I'm going to promote my Discord. I spend way too much of my time there, so join it because I want more people there. Bye!